Hey guys, welcome back to the Atlas Archives Deep Dive series, where we explore in depth the rich and fascinating histories and geographies of every country on Earth. Tonight's episode brings us to Bahrain, a small yet storied island kingdom nestled in the heart of the Persian Gulf. Though modest in size, Bahrain's history stretches back thousands of years, from the ancient Dilmun civilization once hailed as the land of immortality, to its rise as a vital hub of trade, culture, and pearl diving. In this episode, we'll take a calm, steady journey through the geography, history, and cultural essence of Bahrain, from the shimmering turquoise waters that cradle its islands to the bustling skyline of Manama, from the age-old forts and burial mounds that whisper tales of antiquity to the modern prosperity built on oil and innovation. This is the story of a nation that bridges ancient heritage and modern ambition. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where and what time you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see how far this community reaches around the world. And if you're enjoying this series, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future deep dives. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of Bahrain. Chapter 1: Ancient Foundations, the Dilmun Civilization. Tonight, we begin our exploration in the depths of antiquity, when this archipelago in the Persian Gulf was home to one of the ancient world's most remarkable civilizations. Let us settle into the ancient past, to a time when the great civilizations of Mesopotamia were just beginning to flourish, when the written word was still a new and wondrous invention, and when the islands we now know as Bahrain were called by a different name altogether. This was the land of Dilmun, a civilization that emerged around the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, and whose influence would ripple across the ancient world for nearly 2,500 years. The story of Dilmun begins to emerge from the mists of time through clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script, discovered in the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk. These tablets, dating to the end of the 4th millennium before the Common Era, contain the first written references to Dilmun, marking it as a place of great importance to the Mesopotamian world. The Sumerians spoke of Dilmun with a reverence that suggests it held a special place in their cosmology and commerce alike. In Sumerian mythology, Dilmun was portrayed as a paradise, a pure and pristine land where sickness was unknown and death held no dominion. The epic tales describe it as a place where the water was fresh and sweet, where the date palms grew tall and abundant, and where the people lived in harmony with the divine forces that governed the world. Some scholars have even suggested that these ancient descriptions of Dilmun may have influenced the later biblical concept of the Garden of Eden, making Bahrain perhaps the earliest known paradise in human literature. But Dilmun was far more than a mythological paradise. It was a thriving commercial center, strategically positioned at the crossroads of the ancient world's most important trade routes. The civilization reached its golden age around 2200 before the Common Era, when it controlled the vital maritime trade routes of the Persian Gulf. Ships from Dilmun sailed both east and west, connecting the great cities of Mesopotamia, Sumer, and Babylon with the distant Indus Valley civilization, known to the Mesopotamians as Meluhha. The merchants of Dilmun grew wealthy by serving as middlemen in this lucrative trade network. From the east, they brought copper from the mines of Oman, carnelian beads from the Indus Valley, and precious stones from distant lands. From the west, they carried agricultural products from the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, woolen textiles, and manufactured goods. The markets of one of Sumer's greatest cities, were filled with goods that had passed through Dilmun's ports, and the profits from this trade were substantial enough to make the Dilmun merchants legendary figures in the economic texts of the period. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of Dilmun's prosperity and sophistication. The capital of this ancient civilization was most likely located at what is now known as Qalat al-Bahrain, a massive tell, or artificial mound, that rises on the northern coast of Bahrain Island. This archaeological site, designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the year 2005, covers approximately 18 hectares and contains layer upon layer of human habitation spanning over 4,000 years. Excavations have revealed 3 successive Dilmun cities built one atop the other, each more sophisticated than the last. The site reveals a city of considerable urban planning and architectural achievement. There were residential quarters with well-built houses, public buildings that suggest a complex administrative system, commercial districts where trade was conducted, and religious structures that speak to the spiritual life of the people. A particularly remarkable feature is the sea tower, located about 1,600 meters northwest of the main tell, which may have served as an ancient lighthouse, guiding ships safely to Dilmun's harbor through the treacherous coral reefs that still surround Bahrain today. Perhaps the most striking evidence of Dilmun's civilization can be found in the extraordinary burial mounds that dot the Bahraini landscape. These tumuli, numbering over 11,000 across 21 separate archaeological sites, constitute one of the largest and most unique necropolises in the ancient world. Built between approximately 2200 and 1750 before the Common Era, these burial mounds were not simple graves but elaborate cylindrical towers, some reaching considerable height, that were later covered with earth and stone to form the mounds we see today. The burial mounds reveal much about Dilmun society. The sheer number of graves suggests a large and prosperous population, while the variety in size and construction indicates a complex social hierarchy. The smaller mounds, which far outnumber the grand ones, were likely the final resting places of common citizens. The royal mounds, however, were magnificent structures, built as 2-storied sepulchral towers in a style reminiscent of ziggurats, the stepped pyramids of Mesopotamia. These elaborate tombs, found particularly in the area of Ayali, contained burial chambers equipped with alcoves, a unique architectural feature not found elsewhere in the ancient world. The grave goods discovered within these tombs tell us about the beliefs and practices of the Dilmun people. They buried their dead with pottery, both locally made and imported, personal ornaments, weapons, and seals. The Dilmun stamp seals are particularly fascinating artifacts, circular objects typically made of soft stone and inscribed with intricate designs depicting animals, mythological scenes, and human figures. These seals served both practical and symbolic purposes, used to mark ownership of goods and perhaps to invoke divine protection. The imagery on these seals provides our most direct window into the religious beliefs and artistic sensibilities of the Dilmun people. The economic foundation of Dilmun's prosperity rested on several pillars. Chief among these was the trade in copper, a metal of immense value in the Bronze Age world. While Dilmun itself had no copper mines, it controlled the trade routes from Oman's rich copper deposits to the metal-hungry cities of Mesopotamia. Merchants in would eagerly await the arrival of Dilmun ships loaded with copper ingots, paying premium prices for this essential material. The profits from this trade alone were enough to sustain a significant portion of Dilmun's economy. But perhaps Dilmun's greatest natural treasure was something far more precious in the arid lands of the ancient Near East: fresh water. Unlike most of the Arabian Peninsula, Bahrain was blessed with abundant natural springs, fed by underground aquifers that extended beneath the Persian Gulf from the mountains of western Arabia. These springs made agriculture possible on an island that would otherwise have been too dry to support a large population. The date palms, for which Bahrain is still famous today, grew in abundance, and gardens flourished along the northern coast of the island. This abundance of fresh water may explain the meaning of Bahrain's ancient name. In Arabic, Bahrain means two seas, and while the exact reference has been debated by scholars, it may refer to the remarkable phenomenon of fresh water and salt water existing in close proximity. Ancient texts speak of the wonder of diving into the salty Persian Gulf and filling water skins with fresh water from underwater springs, a phenomenon that the Arab navigator Ahmad bin Majid would still marvel at when he visited the islands in the year 1489. The written records of Dilmun provide fascinating glimpses into the civilization's international connections. Mesopotamian texts from the 3rd millennium before the Common Era frequently mention Dilmun as a trade partner, listing the goods that arrived from its ports. One particularly detailed text from the time of Nanshe, king of Lagash around 2300 before the Common Era, mentions that the ships of Dilmun brought him wood as tribute from foreign lands. Other texts record elaborate commercial agreements between Dilmun merchants and their counterparts in suggesting a sophisticated system of international trade law and practice. During the early Dilmun period, the civilization appears to have been politically independent, with its own kings ruling from the capital at Khalat al-Bahrain. Archaeological evidence from around 1780 before the Common Era includes inscriptions on stone vessels naming Dilmun kings Yagliel and his father Rimum. These inscriptions, found in massive tumuli that were evidently royal burial places, suggest that Dilmun maintained its independence and developed its own royal dynasty. The names themselves are interesting, as Yagliel appears to be of Amoritic origin, indicating possible connections with or influence from the Levant. The relationship between Dilmun and Mesopotamia was complex and evolved over the centuries. At times, Dilmun appears to have been fully independent, with its own kings receiving royal gifts from Mesopotamian rulers as equals. At other times, particularly during the height of Mesopotamian empires, Dilmun may have been under some form of tributary relationship. Texts from the city of Isin suggest that around 2000 before the Common Era, Dilmun had become an independent kingdom, free from Mesopotamian rule, though still maintaining close commercial and diplomatic ties. Around 1720 before the Common Era, the archaeological record suggests that Dilmun entered a period of decline. Many settlements were abandoned, the construction of royal burial mounds ceased, and trade appears to have diminished significantly. The reasons for this decline are not entirely clear, but several factors may have contributed. Changes in trade routes, the rise of competing commercial centers, internal political instability, or environmental changes such as the depletion of water resources could all have played a role. Despite this decline, Dilmun did not disappear entirely. The civilization continued, though in a diminished form, and the name Dilmun continued to appear in Mesopotamian texts for centuries. The site at Khalat al-Bahrain shows evidence of continuous occupation, suggesting that while Dilmun's golden age had ended, the settlement remained an important local center. The resilience of this ancient civilization, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining its identity, speaks to the enduring importance of Bahrain's strategic location and natural advantages. In the later Bronze Age and early Iron Age, Dilmun came under the control of successive Mesopotamian empires. The Middle Assyrian Empire, which flourished between 1365 and 1050 before the Common Era, conquered Dilmun and incorporated it into their trading network. Archaeological evidence suggests that Assyrian king Sennacherib, who ruled from 707 to 681 before the Common Era, attacked the northeastern Persian Gulf and captured Bahrain, bringing it under direct Assyrian control. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, which rose to power after the fall of Assyria, also maintained control over Dilmun. Administrative records from the Neo-Babylonian period, dated to 567 before the Common Era, specifically mention that Dilmun was controlled by the king of Babylon. This record represents one of the last references to Dilmun by its ancient name, as the civilization that had flourished for over 2 millennia was gradually being absorbed into larger imperial structures and losing its distinct identity. The final mention of Dilmun as an independent entity comes with the collapse of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in 538 before the Common Era, when the Persian Achaemenid Empire conquered Babylon and assumed control of its territories, including Bahrain. After this point, the name Dilmun gradually faded from use, replaced by new names that reflected new rulers and new eras. Yet the legacy of Dilmun remained, embedded in the landscape through the thousands of burial mounds, preserved in the layers of Khalat al-Bahrain, and remembered in the ancient texts that spoke of this remarkable island civilization. As we conclude our exploration of ancient Dilmun, we stand in awe of a civilization that thrived for nearly 2.5 millennia, that connected great empires across vast distances, and that left behind monuments that still dot the Bahraini landscape today. The story of Dilmun reminds us that Bahrain's importance on the world stage is not a modern phenomenon, but rather a continuation of a role the islands have played since the very dawn of recorded history. From these ancient foundations, new civilizations would rise, each adding their own layer to the rich tapestry of Bahraini history. Chapter 2. Classical to Medieval Periods, Empires and Transformations. As the ancient name of Dilmun faded into history with the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the islands of Bahrain entered a new chapter, one that would see them pass through the hands of Persian emperors, Greek conquerors, Arab caliphs, and eventually distant European powers. This was an era of profound transformations, when the islands would be known by different names, embrace new religions, and witness the rise and fall of empires that shaped the medieval world. When the Persian Achaemenid Empire conquered Babylon in the year 538 before the Common Era, Bahrain became part of one of the ancient world's most magnificent empires. The Achaemenids, who ruled from their capitals at Persepolis and Susa, created an administrative system that stretched from Egypt to India, and the strategic islands of Bahrain were incorporated into this vast network. Under Persian rule, Bahrain served as an important naval base and trading port, its position in the Persian Gulf making it invaluable for controlling maritime commerce. The Achaemenid navy established bases along the Persian Gulf coast, including in Bahrain, transforming the islands into a vital link in the empire's maritime defences and commercial networks. Ships sailing between Persia and India would stop at Bahraini ports, and the ancient springs that had sustained Dilmun continued to provide fresh water for sailors and merchants. The Persian period also brought new administrative structures, new forms of governance, and connections to the wider Persian cultural sphere that would influence the islands for centuries to come. This Persian dominance would continue for over 3 centuries, but in the year 334 before the Common Era, the world was forever changed by the arrival of a young Macedonian king named Alexander. Alexander the Great's conquest of the Persian Empire brought Greek influence to the shores of the Persian Gulf, and though Alexander himself died before he could fully explore these waters, his admiral Nearchus became one of the first Greeks to set foot on Bahraini soil. Nearchus, sailing through the Persian Gulf in the service of Alexander, was deeply impressed by what he found. He recorded his observations of the islands, noting the verdant landscape, the cotton plantations that covered much of the land, and the thriving trade networks that connected these islands to distant lands. He wrote of large plantations of cotton trees, from which are manufactured clothes called sindones, of strongly differing degrees of value, some being costly, others less expensive. These textiles, he noted, were exported not just to India but throughout Arabia, testament to Bahrain's continuing importance as a commercial centre. With the Greek conquest came a new name. The islands that had been called Dilmun for millennia were now known as Tylos, a Hellenization of the Semitic word Tilmun. Under this new name, Bahrain entered what historians call the Hellenistic period, an era when Greek culture and language spread across the eastern Mediterranean and into Asia. Yet this was not simply a matter of foreign domination replacing local culture. Rather, it was a complex blending of Greek and indigenous traditions. The Greek historian Theophrastus, a student of Aristotle, wrote about Tylos with fascination, describing how the island was famous not only for its cotton, but also for its production of walking canes, engraved with emblems that were highly prized in Babylon. The island had become renowned for producing these decorative canes from local wood, a craft that combined practical utility with artistic expression. Such details remind us that even under foreign rule, local industries and crafts continued to flourish. Archaeological evidence from Qalat al-Bahrain reveals that during the Hellenistic period, the city underwent significant development. The language of the upper classes became Greek, though Aramaic remained in everyday use among the common people. Local coinage from this period shows a seated Zeus, suggesting that Greek religious practices were adopted, at least officially, though they may well have been syncretized with local beliefs. The god worshipped as Zeus may have been the Arabian sun god Shams in Greek guise, an example of the cultural blending that characterized this era. Tylos was also the site of Greek athletic contests, those quintessentially Hellenic celebrations of physical prowess and competitive spirit. The presence of such events indicates that Greek culture had taken root among at least some segments of the population, creating a hybrid society that looked both to the Mediterranean world and to its Arabian roots. This cultural duality would be a recurring theme in Bahraini history, as the islands repeatedly found themselves at the intersection of different civilizations. The period of direct Greek influence was relatively short-lived. After Alexander's death in 323 before the Common Era, his empire fractured into successor kingdoms ruled by his generals and their descendants. Bahrain may have fallen under the control of the Seleucid Empire, the Greek dynasty that ruled much of the former Persian Empire, though the archaeological evidence for this is debated. What is clear is that by around 127 before the Common Era, Tylos had been incorporated into Characene, also called Messene, a semi-independent kingdom established in what is now southern Iraq. The Parthian Empire, another Iranian dynasty that rose to power in the 3rd century before the Common Era, eventually brought the Persian Gulf under its control. By approximately 130 before the Common Era, the Parthians had extended their influence to Bahrain and established garrisons along the southern coast of the Persian Gulf. The islands once again became part of a larger Persian-influenced empire, though one quite different from the Achaemenids who had ruled centuries earlier. The Parthian period gave way to the Sassanid period in the 3rd century of the Common Era. The Sassanid Empire, the last great pre-Islamic Persian empire, controlled Bahrain from approximately 224 to 631 of the Common Era. Under Sassanid rule, Bahrain continued to serve as an important maritime outpost, and Persian cultural and religious influences, particularly Zoroastrianism, became prominent on the islands. Yet throughout all these changes of empire and dynasty, Bahrain's fundamental role as a trading center and strategic port remained constant. In the 7th century of the Common Era, an event of world historical importance would transform Bahrain forever. In the year 629, during the 7th year of the Islamic calendar, known as the Hijra, the islands embraced Islam. The Prophet Muhammad himself sent a representative, Al-Ala'a al-Hadrami, to govern Bahrain and to spread the new faith. The conversion of Bahrain to Islam was relatively peaceful, and the islands became one of the early regions outside the Arabian heartland to join the growing Islamic community. This religious transformation brought Bahrain into a new cultural and political sphere. The islands were now part of the Islamic world, connected not to Persian or Greek empires but to the rapidly expanding Arab caliphates. During the time of Umar I, the second caliph, the famous companion of the Prophet, Abu Huraira, served as governor of Bahrain. The Caliph Umar also appointed Uthman bin Abi al-As as governor, establishing a pattern of rule by appointees of the Caliph that would continue for decades. One of the earliest mosques in the Islamic world was built in Bahrain during this period. The Al-Khamis Mosque, founded in the year 692 during the era of the Umayyad Caliph Umar II, stands as a testament to Bahrain's early embrace of Islam. The mosque, with its distinctive twin minarets, remains an important historical landmark, connecting modern Bahrain to its early Islamic heritage. The establishment of such a significant religious structure so early in Islamic history underscores Bahrain's importance to the expanding Muslim world. Yet the Islamic period in Bahrain's history was not without turbulence. In the year 899, a radical Islamic sect known as the Kharmatians seized control of Bahrain. The Kharmatians were millenarian, Ismaili Muslims who sought to create a utopian society based on reason and the redistribution of property among their initiates. They established their base in the region of Assa, in medieval Bahrain, which at that time referred to a much larger area than the islands alone, encompassing much of the eastern Arabian coast. The Kharmatian state that emerged in Bahrain was unlike anything else in the Islamic world. They rejected many of the practices of mainstream Islam, abolished certain religious obligations, and created a communal economy where property was shared among members of their community. Their rule was characterized by both social experimentation and military aggression. From their base in Bahrain, the Kharmatians launched raids throughout Arabia and beyond, targeting the pilgrimage routes that carried Muslims to and from the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. In the year 906, the Kharmatians ambushed the pilgrim caravan returning from Mecca and massacred 20,000 pilgrims in an attack of shocking brutality. This was just the beginning of their campaign against the established Islamic order. Under the leadership of Abu Tahir al-Janabi, the Kharmatians came perilously close to capturing Baghdad itself in 923, threatening the very heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. But it was in the year 930 that the Kharmatians committed an act that would horrify the entire Islamic world. They attacked the holy city of Mecca itself during the pilgrimage season, killed thousands of pilgrims, and committed acts of desecration that shocked believers everywhere. They threw corpses into the sacred well of Zamzam, polluting the spring that Muslims believed had miraculously appeared to save Hagar and her son Ishmael in the desert. And most shocking of all, they stole the black stone, the sacred meteorite that had been embedded in the Kaaba since pre-Islamic times, and which Muslims believe was given to Abraham by the angel Gabriel. The theft of the black stone caused it to break into 7 pieces, and the Karmatians took these fragments back to their base in Asa. For 22 years, the most sacred object in Islam was held captive in Bahrain, despite desperate attempts by the Abbasid caliphs to negotiate its return. Finally, in the year 951, under circumstances that remain mysterious to this day, the black stone was returned. It arrived wrapped in a sack and was thrown into the great mosque of Kufa in Iraq, accompanied by a note that read simply, "By command we took it, and by command we have brought it back." The Karmatian state in Bahrain eventually declined, weakened by internal conflicts and external pressures. In the year 976, they were defeated by the Abbasids, bringing an end to their controversial rule. The Arab Umayyad dynasty of Al-Hassa then took control of the entire Bahrain region in the year 1076, establishing a more conventional form of Islamic governance. The islands returned to the mainstream of Islamic civilization, though the memory of the Karmatian period remained as one of the most extraordinary chapters in Bahrain's medieval history. The centuries that followed saw Bahrain pass through the control of various Arab and Persian rulers, each leaving their mark on the island's culture and society. The strategic importance of Bahrain meant that it was never left in peace for long, as competing powers recognized the value of controlling these islands at the heart of the Persian Gulf's trade routes. The pearl fisheries, which had been important since ancient times, became increasingly valuable, and Bahrain's reputation as a source of the finest pearls in the world began to grow. By the early 16th century, the islands were under the control of the Jabrids, an Arab dynasty that ruled much of eastern Arabia. The Jabrid ruler Mukrin ibn Zamil governed Bahrain as part of his larger emirate, maintaining the island's traditional role as a trading center and pearl fishing hub. But events far to the west were about to bring dramatic change to the Persian Gulf, as European powers began to expand into Asian waters in search of new trade routes and commercial opportunities. The Portuguese, who had established themselves as a major naval power through their explorations along the African coast and their voyages to India, turned their attention to the Persian Gulf in the early 1500s. After the Portuguese conquest of Hormuz in 1507, transforming that strategic island into a client state, they sought to extend their control over the entire Gulf region. Bahrain, with its strategic location and valuable pearl fisheries, was an obvious target. In the year 1521, a Portuguese force under the command of Antonio Correa, allied with the Kingdom of Hormuz, invaded Bahrain. The campaign was swift and brutal. On the 27th of June, Portuguese troops landed on the island despite its fortifications. The Jabrid ruler Mukrin ibn Zamil led his forces in defense of the island, and initially his troops had the advantage in the fighting, but in the midst of battle, Mukrin was struck down, and without their leader, the defense collapsed. Mukrin died 3 days later from his wounds, and in a grim display of conquest, his severed head was sent to Hormuz as a trophy. The Portuguese commander, Antonio Correa, was so proud of this victory that he had Mukrin's bleeding, severed head depicted on his family's coat of arms in Portugal, an image that remarkably remains part of the Correa family heraldry to this day. After the conquest, the Portuguese sacked Bahrain, burning its ships and asserting their control over the islands. They appointed a local Arab named Lukat, who was well respected by the population, to govern on their behalf, establishing a pattern of indirect rule that would characterize much of the Portuguese presence in the Gulf. The Portuguese period in Bahrain's history lasted for approximately 80 years, from 1521 to 1602. During this time, the Portuguese rebuilt and expanded the fortifications at Khalat al-Bahrain, constructing the massive fort that still crowns the ancient tell today. This fortress, with its thick walls and commanding position overlooking the sea, served as the headquarters for Portuguese power in Bahrain and stands as the most visible legacy of their occupation. Portuguese rule was maintained largely through local governors, usually Sunni Persians from Hormuz, who administered the islands while Portuguese military power provided the ultimate authority. The Portuguese were primarily interested in Bahrain's strategic value and its pearl fisheries, which they taxed heavily. They also sought to ensure that Bahrain remained loyal to the Portuguese-controlled Kingdom of Hormuz, which was obligated to pay annual tribute to Portugal. However, Portuguese rule was never entirely secure. The predominantly Shia population of Bahrain chafed under the rule of Sunni governors, backed by foreign Christian power. Several rebellions erupted during the Portuguese period, including one in which rebels crucified the Hormuz governor. The Portuguese managed to suppress these uprisings, but the underlying tensions remained, creating an unstable situation that would eventually lead to their downfall. In the year 1602, the Portuguese presence in Bahrain came to an abrupt end. The governor at that time, a relative of the King of Hormuz, began executing members of Bahrain's leading families, sparking a popular uprising. The rebellion was led by a figure named Rukn-ed-Din, who seized control of the Bahrain fort from the Portuguese garrison. Portuguese attempts to retake the islands were thwarted by aid from the Prince of Shiraz, and the Portuguese found themselves unable to reassert their authority. This uprising coincided with a broader shift in power in the Persian Gulf, as the Safavid Empire of Persia, under the leadership of Shah Abbas I, moved to expel European powers from the region. The Persian governor of Fars province, Alaverdi Khan, took advantage of the situation in Bahrain, capturing the islands on his own initiative. When Shah Abbas learned of this, he approved the action and incorporated Bahrain into the Safavid Empire, bringing the islands back under Persian rule for the first time in centuries. The Safavid period in Bahrain's history would last for over a century and a half, from 1602 to 1783, though this rule was often indirect and sometimes interrupted. The Safavids, as a Shia dynasty, were generally more acceptable to Bahrain's Shia majority than the Portuguese and their Sunni Hormuz governors had been. Under Safavid rule, Bahrain was administered as part of the province of Fars, governed from the city of Behbahan in southern Iran. Yet, even under the Safavids, Bahrain experienced periods of instability and foreign intervention. The islands were invaded by Omani forces in 1717 and again in 1738, though Persian control was eventually restored both times. In 1753, Bahrain was occupied by the Huala Arabs of the Al-Madkur family, who ruled the islands in the name of Persia while maintaining a degree of autonomy. This period saw Bahrain caught between competing powers, its strategic value making it a prize that many wished to control but few could hold securely. Throughout all these centuries of conquest and reconquest, through the rise and fall of empires and the coming and going of foreign rulers, the people of Bahrain maintained their own cultural identity. The pearl divers continued their dangerous work in the Gulf waters. The date palm groves continued to flourish wherever fresh water was available, and the markets of Manama and Muharraq continued to bustle with commerce. The island's fundamental character as a trading center and maritime culture remained constant, even as the names by which they were called and the flags that flew over their forts changed with the passing centuries. As the 18th century drew toward its close, Bahrain stood at another turning point in its long history. The Safavid Empire was in decline, its grip on its outlying territories weakening. The pearl fisheries remained valuable, but the prosperity they generated was limited by political instability and heavy taxation. The islands were ripe for another change of fortune, another shift in the long succession of rulers who had claimed sovereignty over these strategic islands. And that change was about to arrive, borne on ships from the nearby coast of Qatar, bringing with it a dynasty that would rule Bahrain into the modern era. Chapter 3: The Al Khalifa Dynasty and British Protectorate. As the 18th century drew to a close, a new chapter in Bahrain's long history was about to begin. This is the story of the Al Khalifa family, of their conquest of Bahrain, and of their complex relationship with the British Empire that would shape the islands for nearly 2 centuries. To understand the Al Khalifa arrival, we must travel to Central Arabia, to the region of Najd. Here, Bedouin tribes of the Aniza Confederation lived nomadic lives. Among them were clans that would become known as the Bani Utbah, meaning those who moved. In the early 1700s, these clans, including the Al Khalifa, Al Sabah, and Al Jalama families, migrated eastward. By 1716, they settled in Kuwait, prospering through pearl diving and trade for 50 years. Around 1766, seeking independence and access to rich pearl banks, the Al Khalifa and Al Jalahma sailed south to Qatar's northwestern shore, establishing Al Zubarah. This thriving port town grew wealthy from pearl trade. The Utub had purchased date palm gardens in Bahrain decades earlier, establishing economic ties. Historical records show that 81 years before their conquest, Utub families already owned significant Bahraini property. Bahrain was then ruled by Nasser al-Madkur, a Persian governor controlling the islands for Karim Khan Zand. His administration imposed heavy taxation, creating tension with the wealthy Utub clans. In 1782, conflict erupted at the Battle of Zubarah. The Utub defeated al-Madkur's forces decisively, revealing Persian weakness and emboldening the clans. In 1783, Ahmed bin Muhammad bin Khalifa, later called Ahmed al-Fateh or Ahmed the Conqueror, led an invasion force from Zubarah. The fleet crossed the 24 kilometers separating Qatar from Bahrain. The conquest succeeded quickly. Al-Madkur's weakened garrison could not resist, and Arab rule was restored after centuries of Persian control. This year marks the beginning of uninterrupted Al Khalifa rule that continues today, over 240 years later. Ahmed al-Fateh became Bahrain's first hakim, or ruler, under the Al Khalifa. Interestingly, he remained based in Zubarah, spending only summers in Bahrain and appointing Ali bin Faris to govern in his absence. This arrangement reflected continued ties to Qatar. Ahmed ruled until his death in 1795 from a heart attack. He was buried in Manamah beside a renowned scholar's grave. Ahmed's sons, Salman and Abdullah, moved permanently to Bahrain in 1796 and divided rule between them. Salman took Bahrain Island, while Abdullah controlled Muharraq Island. Each ruled independently, imposing separate taxes. This division created weakness as the two branches, Al-Salman and Al-Abdullah, developed conflicting interests that would plague Bahrain for decades. external threats compounded internal problems. Between 1816 and 1828, Oman launched 4 military campaigns against Bahrain. All ultimately failed, with the final attempt in 1828 resulting in devastating Omani losses. Yet internal al-Khalifa conflicts proved more damaging than foreign invasions. When Khalifa bin Salman died in 1834, Abdullah seized sole control. His reign until 1843 was chaotic, marked by destructive wars. Trade declined to half its former volume. Many residents, especially from the Shia majority, emigrated due to oppressive taxation and disorder. The family strife threatened to destroy all early prosperity. During this instability, Britain took greater interest in Bahrain. As the dominant naval power, Britain sought to suppress Gulf piracy and secure trade routes to India. In 1820, Britain signed a general treaty of peace with Gulf chiefs, including the Al-Khalifa, formally recognizing them as Bahrain's legitimate rulers. For decades, the Al-Khalifa sought British protection, but Britain maintained Bahrain's independence. This changed in 1860 when Muhammad bin Khalifa, facing threats, appealed to both Persia and the Ottoman Empire for protection. He signed an Ottoman agreement in March 1860, alarming Britain. In 1861, Colonel Louis Pelly intervened, forcing the ruler to sign the Perpetual Truce of Peace and Friendship. The ruler pledged to refrain from war, piracy, and slavery at sea, while Britain promised maritime protection. This marked Bahrain's effective transformation into a British protectorate. Internal conflicts continued through the 1860s. In 1869, violent fighting erupted between factions. Ali bin Khalifa was killed. British forces intervened again under Pelly's command. After consulting al-Khalifa chiefs, the British appointed 21-year-old Isa bin Ali al-Khalifa as ruler. He would govern for 54 years until 1923. From this moment until independence in 1971, Britain controlled Bahrain's security and foreign relations, while the Al-Khalifa managed internal affairs. Treaties in 1880 and 1892 further restricted Bahrain's foreign relations, prohibiting negotiations with foreign powers and territory disposal to anyone but Britain. These completed Bahrain's protectorate status. During Isa bin Ali's reign, Bahrain experienced relative stability centered on pearl diving. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were pearl diving's golden age. Before World War I, 400 vessels engaged in pearl hunting, with annual exports exceeding £30,000. The diving season from May to September saw thousands of men risk their lives, diving to 40 meters without breathing equipment, staying underwater up to 2 minutes collecting oysters. Ship captains, called nakudas, advanced money to divers, creating debt relationships. Despite hardships, pearl diving sustained Bahrain's economy and employed much of the population. This prosperity was fragile. In the 1920s and early 30s, the industry collapsed catastrophically. The 1929 global depression reduced luxury goods demand. Japanese cultured pearls flooded markets with cheaper alternatives. Within years, Bahrain faced economic crisis and widespread destitution. As pearls failed, geological surveys suggested oil potential. In 1923, Major Frank Holmes, called Abu al-Naft, or Father of Oil, convinced Sheikh Hamad bin Isa al-Khalifa to grant an oil concession. The 1925 agreement gave exploration rights in exchange for drilling water wells. Rights passed to Standard Oil Company of California, which formed the Bahrain Petroleum Company, BAPCO, in January 1929. Drilling began at Jabal al-Dukhan, the Mountain of Smoke, Bahrain's highest point. On June 1st, 1932, oil was discovered at well number 1, making Bahrain the first southern Gulf location to find oil. This proved oil formations extended throughout the region, triggering the Middle East oil boom. The timing was providential. As pearls collapsed, oil offered alternative wealth and employment. The first crude shipment of 25,000 barrels exported in 1934. By 1937, a refinery opened, beginning the industry defining modern Bahrain. Former pearl divers found Bapco employment, learning new technical skills. Oil development brought profound changes. In 1926, Britain appointed Charles Belgrave as personal secretary to the ruler, though his role was far more extensive. For 30 years until 1957, Belgrave was de facto administrator, building infrastructure, establishing schools, constructing roads, organizing police forces, and creating modern bureaucratic systems. His work transformed Bahrain from tribal society to modern state. Belgrave's tenure was controversial. He brought modernization and efficiency but symbolized foreign domination. As pan-Arab nationalism grew in the 1950s, he became a focal point for anti-British sentiment. Following demonstrations in 1957, he was forced to leave, marking the beginning of transition toward greater autonomy. The mid-20th century saw growing political consciousness. Education expanded, and young Bahrainis studying in Egypt, Lebanon, and elsewhere returned with nationalist ideas. Organizations like the National Union Committee, formed in 1954, advocated for reforms and ending British control through strikes and demonstrations. By the 1960s, decolonization swept the world. Britain, financially strained after 2 world wars, reconsidered commitments east of Suez. In 1968, Britain announced Gulf withdrawal, ending century-old treaty relationships. This set independence processes in motion. Initially, discussions explored a Gulf states union including Bahrain, Qatar, and the 7 trucial states that became the United Arab Emirates. By 1971, the 9 sheikdoms could not agree on terms. Bahrain chose separate independence. One obstacle remained: Iran's historical sovereignty claim. In 1970, the United Nations conducted a Bahraini opinion poll. Results were unambiguous. The overwhelming majority wanted an independent Arab state ruled by the Khalifa rather than joining Iran. On May 11, 1970, the UN Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 278, recognizing Bahrain's independence right. Iran renounced its claim. On August 15, 1971, Bahrain declared independence from Britain. On December 16, it became formally independent as the State of Bahrain, with Sheikh Isa bin Salman al-Khalifa as first emir. Thus ended nearly 2 centuries of al-Khalifa rule under British protection and began an era of full sovereignty. The journey from Ahmed al-Fateh's 1783 conquest to 1971 independence was marked by internal conflicts, external threats, economic transformations from pearls to petroleum, and gradual modern state development. Through all changes, the Al-Khalifa dynasty adapted while maintaining their position as rulers of these historic Persian Gulf islands. Chapter 4: Geography and Physical Landscape. Having journeyed through millennia of Bahrain's history, Let us now turn our attention to the physical stage upon which all these events unfolded. The geography of Bahrain is as fascinating as its history, a unique landscape where desert meets sea, where fresh water springs miraculously from beneath salt water, and where human ingenuity has expanded the very land itself through ambitious engineering projects. Bahrain is an archipelago, a collection of islands situated in the Persian Gulf, positioned almost exactly midway along the Gulf's western shore. The name Bahrain itself comes from the Arabic word meaning two seas, a poetic reference that has been interpreted in various ways throughout history. Some scholars suggest it refers to the bays that lie east and west of the main island. Others propose it means the seas north and south of the archipelago. But perhaps the most evocative interpretation relates to the remarkable phenomenon of fresh water and salt water existing in close proximity, a geographical blessing that has sustained human settlement on these islands for over 5,000 years. The Kingdom of Bahrain today consists of an archipelago of approximately 50 natural islands, to which have been added 33 artificial islands created through land reclamation projects, bringing the total to 83 islands. The main island, also called Bahrain Island or Al Bahrain, dominates the archipelago, accounting for approximately 83% of the nation's total landmass. This main island measures roughly 48 kilometers from north to south at its longest point, and stretches about 16 kilometers from east to west at its widest point, creating an elongated shape that has been compared to a teardrop lying in the waters of the Gulf. The total land area of the Kingdom of Bahrain is approximately 760 square kilometers, or about 290 square miles. To provide some perspective, this makes Bahrain roughly 4 times the size of Washington, District of Columbia, or slightly larger than Singapore. Among Asian nations, Bahrain is the third smallest, surpassed in diminutive size only by the Maldives and Singapore. Yet, despite its modest dimensions, this small archipelago has wielded influence far beyond what its size might suggest, a testament to the power of strategic location. And strategic location is indeed Bahrain's greatest geographical asset. The islands lie approximately 24 kilometers, or 15 miles, off the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, and roughly 28 kilometers, or 17 miles, from the Qatar Peninsula. To the north, across the waters of the Persian Gulf, lies Iran at a distance of about 200 kilometers. This central position in the Gulf has made Bahrain a natural meeting point, a crossroads where trade routes converge and where cultures have mingled since ancient times. The connection to Saudi Arabia was made physical and permanent in 1986 with the completion of the King Fahd Causeway, a remarkable engineering achievement that transformed Bahrain from an island nation accessible only by sea and air into one connected to the Arabian mainland by road. This causeway stretches for 25 kilometers across the shallow Gulf waters, consisting of a series of bridges and causeways that hop from island to island before finally reaching Saudi territory. The causeway has had profound economic and social impacts, facilitating trade and allowing Saudi visitors easy access to Bahrain's more cosmopolitan atmosphere, particularly on weekends when thousands of Saudis cross the causeway seeking entertainment and dining experiences less readily available in their home country. The physical terrain of Bahrain is predominantly flat and arid, characteristics typical of the Arabian Peninsula's eastern coast. The geological foundation of the islands consists of layers of sedimentary rocks, primarily limestone, sandstone, and marl, a mixture of clay and carbonate minerals. These rock layers were formed during the Cretaceous, Paleogene, and Neogene periods, spanning a vast time frame from approximately 145 million years ago to about 2.6 million years ago. The gentle folding of these sedimentary layers over geological time has created the subtle topography that characterizes the islands today. The central region of the main island is rocky and relatively barren, rising gradually toward the interior. The highest point in the entire Kingdom of Bahrain is found here, at a location called Jabal al-Dukhan, which translates poetically as the Mountain of Smoke. This name derives from the mists and heat haze that often wreath the summit, creating an ethereal appearance. Despite its dramatic name, Jabal al-Dukhan rises to a modest elevation of only 134 meters, or 440 feet, above sea level. Yet in a landscape as flat as Bahrain's, even this relatively small prominence is significant, and the location's importance was magnified immeasurably when it became the site of well number 1, where oil was first discovered in 1932. The southern and western portions of the main island consist largely of a bleak, sandy plain. These areas are characterized by saline sand that supports only the hardiest desert vegetation, primarily scattered thorn trees and tough scrub plants adapted to the harsh conditions of high salinity, intense heat, and minimal rainfall. Salt marshes are common in the southern reaches, where the flat terrain and proximity to sea level allow seawater intrusion. These marshes, while inhospitable to most plants and challenging for human use, provide important habitat for certain bird species and contribute to the island's ecological diversity. In striking contrast to the barren interior and southern regions, the northern and northwestern coasts of Bahrain Island present an entirely different landscape, one that explains why human settlement has thrived here since ancient times. These coastal areas feature a narrow but remarkably fertile belt, approximately 5 kilometers wide, where date palms grow in abundance and vegetable gardens have flourished for millennia. This fertility exists because of one of Bahrain's most precious and unusual geographical features: prolific springs and wells that tap into artesian aquifers containing fresh water. The source of this life-giving fresh water is not local rainfall, of which Bahrain receives very little, but rather precipitation that falls on the mountains of western Saudi Arabia, hundreds of kilometers away. This water percolates through underground geological formations, flowing eastward beneath the desert sands and even beneath the seabed of the Persian Gulf itself, until it emerges through natural springs on Bahrain's northern coast and on some of the smaller surrounding islands. Arab geographers and navigators marveled at this phenomenon for centuries, describing how divers could descend into the salty Gulf waters and fill waterskins with fresh water from submarine springs, a seemingly magical occurrence that demonstrated nature's hidden bounty. These fresh water resources have been absolutely fundamental to Bahrain's historical importance. In a region where water scarcity has always been a critical limiting factor for human settlement, Bahrain's abundant springs gave it a crucial advantage, allowing agricultural development, supporting a larger population than would otherwise have been possible, and providing essential supplies for ships traversing the Gulf. The date palms that these waters nourished became synonymous with Bahrain, and the island's agricultural production was noted by ancient Greek observers and remains part of Bahraini identity today, even though agriculture now represents a tiny fraction of the modern economy. In addition to the main Bahrain island, several other islands are of particular significance within the archipelago. Muharraq Island, located just northeast of the main island, is the second largest in the group and has played a crucial role in Bahraini history. The city of Muharraq, after which the island is named, served as Bahrain's capital during certain historical periods and remains an important urban center. A series of bridges and causeways connect Muharraq to the main island, facilitating the flow of people and goods. Bahrain International Airport is located on Muharraq Island, making it the first point of contact with Bahrain for most international visitors arriving by air. Sitra Island, connected to the main island by a causeway, is home to significant industrial facilities, including oil refinery operations. The island of al-Nasan is notable for being privately owned by the ruling Al-Khalifa family and used as a personal retreat and nature reserve. Nabi Saleh, lying northwest of Sitra, contains several freshwater springs that irrigate the island's date palm groves, maintaining agricultural traditions on a small scale. Jeddah Island, with its rocky terrain, once housed the state prison but has since been converted into a holiday resort, its history transformed into tourism potential. The Hawa Islands deserve special mention. This group of islands lies much closer to the Qatar coast than to Bahrain proper, and their sovereignty was disputed between Bahrain and Qatar for many years. The main Hawa Island stretches about 19 kilometers in length and roughly 1.5 kilometers in width. In the year 2001, an international tribunal awarded the Hawa Islands to Bahrain, settling the long-standing territorial dispute. These islands are largely uninhabited by permanent human residents, but serve as crucial nesting sites for numerous species of migratory birds, making them environmentally significant despite their remoteness and harsh conditions. The seabed surrounding Bahrain is relatively rocky, and extensive coral reefs, particularly off the northern parts of the main island, have formed over thousands of years. These coral formations create both hazards and benefits. They made navigation challenging for ancient mariners, requiring local knowledge and careful piloting to avoid running aground. Yet these same reefs created the perfect habitat for pearl oysters, making Bahrain famous throughout history for producing the finest natural pearls in the world. The reefs also support diverse marine ecosystems that sustained fishing industries and continue to offer potential for careful marine resource management. Bahrain's climate is classified as arid, characterized by 2 distinct seasons rather than the 4 seasons experienced in temperate regions. The summer season extends from April through October and is characterized by extreme heat and high humidity that combine to create conditions that many find nearly unbearable. During the summer months, afternoon temperatures routinely average around 40 degrees Celsius, which equals 104 degrees Fahrenheit. During the peak of summer in May, June, and July, temperatures can reach 46 degrees Celsius or 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The combination of these intense temperatures with humidity levels that can exceed 90% creates an oppressive atmosphere that makes outdoor activity during midday hours quite challenging. Adding to the discomfort of Bahrain's summers is a hot, dry southwestern wind known locally as the cause. This wind periodically sweeps across the islands during the summer months, carrying sand clouds from the barren southern end of Bahrain northward toward the populated areas and the capital city of Manama. These dust-laden winds reduce visibility, coat everything in fine sand, and make the already uncomfortable heat even more difficult to endure. Modern air conditioning has made summer life in Bahrain far more tolerable than it was for previous generations, but the season remains a test of endurance. The winter season, lasting from November through March, offers considerable relief from summer's extremes. During these months, temperatures moderate significantly, typically ranging between 10 and 20 degrees Celsius, or 50 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. These conditions are generally pleasant and comfortable, making winter the preferred season for outdoor activities and tourism. However, winter brings its own weather challenges. Humidity often rises above 90% during winter months, and this season also brings most of Bahrain's limited annual rainfall. Bahrain receives very little precipitation overall. The average annual rainfall totals only about 72 millimeters, or approximately 2.8 inches, concentrated almost entirely in the winter months. When rain does come, it tends to arrive in brief but torrential downpours rather than gentle, sustained rainfall. These sudden storms can quickly flood the shallow wadis, the dry stream beds that remain empty for most of the year. The flooding can briefly impede transportation and cause localized problems, and because the rain falls so intensely and quickly, relatively little of the water soaks into the ground where it might recharge aquifers or benefit vegetation. Most runs off rapidly to the sea, representing a lost resource in a water-scarce environment. During the winter months, Bahrain experiences prevailing winds from the northwest, known as the Shamal. These winds carry damp air over the islands, contributing to the high humidity levels and occasionally bringing cooler temperatures from more northerly regions. The Shamal can persist for several days at a time and, while generally less uncomfortable than the summer's KAW's winds, can still create challenging conditions, particularly for maritime activities. Despite the challenging climate, Bahrain's position in the Persian Gulf has historically offered significant advantages. The Gulf itself is relatively shallow compared to the open ocean, which has implications for navigation, marine life, and resource exploitation. The shallow waters warm quickly in summer and cool more rapidly in winter than deeper ocean waters would, contributing to seasonal temperature variations. These same shallow waters, combined with the rocky seabed and coral reefs, created the perfect environment for the pearl oysters that sustained Bahrain's economy for millennia. In recent decades, Bahrain has dramatically altered its geography through ambitious land reclamation projects. When fresh land for development became scarce on the naturally occurring islands, Bahraini authorities turned to the sea, dredging sand and rock from the seabed and using it to create entirely new islands and expand the coastline of existing ones. This process has added approximately 33 artificial islands to the archipelago and expanded the total land area significantly. Major land reclamation projects include developments like the Bahrain Financial Harbour, the Reef Island, the Durat Al Bahrain Complex, and the Amwaj Islands, each representing substantial engineering efforts that literally expanded the physical territory of the nation. These land reclamation projects have transformed Bahrain's coastline and added valuable real estate for commercial, residential, and tourism development. However, they have also raised environmental concerns. The dredging required for land creation disturbs the seabed ecosystem, affecting marine life, including the coral reefs that are both environmentally important and part of Bahrain's natural heritage. The process also alters water circulation patterns, potentially affecting water quality and marine habitats. Balancing development needs with environmental protection remains an ongoing challenge for this small nation seeking to maximize its limited space. Bahrain faces several significant environmental challenges related to its geography and climate. Water scarcity is perhaps the most fundamental issue. Despite the blessed presence of natural springs that have sustained settlement since ancient times, these freshwater resources are limited and increasingly stressed. Population growth, rising living standards, and industrial development have all increased water demand far beyond what natural springs can provide. The underground aquifers that feed these springs are being depleted faster than rainfall can replenish them, and increasing salinization threatens to contaminate freshwater reserves as seawater intrudes into depleted aquifers. To address water scarcity, Bahrain has invested heavily in desalination technology, constructing plants that remove salt from seawater to make it suitable for drinking and other uses. As of recent estimates, approximately 60% of Bahrain's daily water needs are met through desalination. While this technology has been crucial in supporting Bahrain's development and growing population, it requires substantial energy input, contributing to carbon emissions, and produces brine waste that must be carefully managed to avoid damaging marine environments. Climate change poses additional challenges for Bahrain's geography and future. Rising global temperatures are making Bahrain's already extreme summer heat even more intense, with more frequent and severe heat waves. Changes in rainfall patterns may further stress water resources. Perhaps most concerning for a low-lying island nation, rising sea levels threaten coastal areas and could eventually inundate parts of the islands, particularly the low-lying southern regions and some of the smaller islands. Coastal erosion is already a concern in some areas, and the combination of rising seas and more powerful storms could accelerate this process. Despite these challenges, Bahrain's geography continues to provide significant advantages. The strategic location that made the islands valuable to ancient Dilmun remains valuable today, positioning Bahrain as a hub for Gulf trade, finance, and transportation. The King Fahd Causeway and Bahrain International Airport make the islands easily accessible, while the protected waters of the Gulf of Bahrain provide safe harbors for shipping. The compact size of the archipelago, while limiting in some ways, also makes infrastructure development and connectivity easier and more cost-effective than in larger nations. The physical landscape of Bahrain, though modest in size and challenging in climate, has shaped every aspect of the island's history and development. From the ancient springs that enabled Dilmun's prosperity to the barren interior where oil was discovered, from the coral reefs that produced legendary pearls to the shallow Gulf waters now being transformed into new land, Bahrain's geography has been both limitation and opportunity, challenge and advantage, throughout the long story of human habitation on these islands. Chapter 5. Post-Independence Era. With independence achieved on August 15th, 1971, Bahrain entered a new era of self-determination and rapid development. The small island nation, freed from the protective embrace of the British Empire, now faced the challenges and opportunities of charting its own course in a rapidly changing world. The decades following independence would witness remarkable transformations in governance, economics, society, and Bahrain's role in regional affairs. The early years of independence were marked by optimism and ambitious plans for modernization. Sheikh Isa bin Salman al-Khalifa, who had governed as ruler under British protection, now became the first emir of an independent Bahrain. His government moved quickly to establish the institutions and structures necessary for a sovereign state. In 1973, just 2 years after independence, Bahrain took a bold step by promulgating its first constitution and holding elections for its first parliament, the National Assembly. This constitution established Bahrain as a constitutional monarchy with a bicameral legislature. The National Assembly consisted of an appointed upper house and an elected lower house, with 40 members chosen by male voters in what represented a significant experiment in representative government for the Gulf region. For a brief period, Bahrain appeared to be embarking on a path toward greater political participation and democratic governance that was unusual in the monarchical states of the Arabian Peninsula. However, this democratic experiment proved short-lived. In August of 1975, just 2 years after the parliament's establishment, Emir Isa dissolved the National Assembly. The dissolution came after the parliament attempted to legislate measures that the ruling family found unacceptable, including efforts to limit the Khalifa's authority and demands for the expulsion of the United States Navy from its base in Bahrain. The emir argued that the parliament had become obstructionist and was preventing effective governance. The dissolution would mark the beginning of a long period without an elected legislature. Despite the end of parliamentary democracy, Bahrain continued to develop economically and infrastructurally throughout the 1970s and 80s. The oil revenues that had begun flowing in the 1930s had grown substantially, providing the government with resources to invest in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic diversification. Bahrain had an advantage over some of its neighbors in that its oil discovery came earlier, forcing the country to think about economic diversification sooner than oil-rich states that could rely more heavily on petroleum revenues. In 1975, Bahrain made a strategic decision that would shape its economic future for decades. The government established Bahrain as an offshore banking center, creating regulations and incentives to attract international financial institutions to establish operations on the islands. This decision proved remarkably successful. Bahrain's strategic location, its relatively developed infrastructure, its educated workforce, and its business-friendly regulatory environment made it an attractive hub for Gulf and international finance. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bahrain had established itself as the financial capital of the Gulf region. Major international banks opened branches in Manama, and the city's skyline began to transform with modern office towers housing financial institutions. This financial sector diversification was crucial because Bahrain's own oil reserves were relatively modest compared to its neighbors. While Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates could rely on vast petroleum wealth for generations, Bahrain needed alternative sources of revenue and employment. The industrial sector also developed during this period. The Aluminium Bahrain Company, known as ALBA, had been established in 1968 and began operations in 1971, the same year as independence. Using energy from Bahrain's natural gas reserves to power the smelting process, ALBA became one of the world's largest aluminum smelters. The facility provided substantial employment and export revenues, representing another successful diversification effort away from complete dependence on oil. In 1981, Bahrain joined with 5 other Gulf Arab states to form the Gulf Cooperation Council, known as the GCC. This regional organization, which includes Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, and Bahrain, was established to promote economic cooperation, coordinate defense policies, and present a unified front on regional issues. For Bahrain, membership in the GCC provided security guarantees from its larger neighbors and facilitated trade and economic integration with the wealthy Gulf monarchies. The 1980s and 90s brought both prosperity and challenges. The completion of the King Fahd Causeway in 1986, linking Bahrain to Saudi Arabia, had profound economic and social impacts. Saudi visitors could now easily drive to Bahrain for weekends, bringing tourism revenues and supporting Bahrain's hospitality industry. The causeway also facilitated trade and labor mobility between the two kingdoms. However, some Bahrainis worried about cultural influences and the potential for Saudi conservatism to affect Bahrain's relatively more liberal social atmosphere. Political tensions simmered beneath the surface of economic development. The Shia majority population, which comprised approximately 60 to 70% of Bahraini citizens, felt increasingly marginalized under the rule of the Sunni Khalifa family. discrimination in employment, particularly in government and security services, was a persistent grievance. The absence of an elected parliament since 1975 meant that ordinary Bahrainis had limited channels for political participation or expressing concerns about government policies. These tensions erupted in the 1990s with a series of protests and civil disturbances. Beginning in 1994, Bahrain experienced significant unrest, with demonstrations calling for the restoration of parliament, political reforms, and an end to discrimination against the Shia population. The government responded with arrests, detentions, and in some cases, the use of force to suppress protests. This period of unrest, which lasted through the mid-1990s, damaged Bahrain's reputation and raised international concerns about human rights. The regional context also affected Bahrain during these decades. The Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 created instability and tension throughout the Gulf. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 had established a Shia Islamic Republic in Iran, and Iranian leaders occasionally made statements suggesting support for Bahrain's Shia population, raising fears in the Khalifa family about Iranian interference. In 1990 to 1991, the Gulf War, triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, saw Bahrain provide facilities and support to coalition forces driving Iraqi troops from Kuwait. A significant turning point came in 1999 when Sheikh Hamad bin Isa al-Khalifa succeeded his father as ruler. The new emir, who had served as crown prince and gained a reputation as a reformer, announced his intention to implement political reforms and national reconciliation. In November of 2000, he established a committee to create what he called a National Action Charter that would transform Bahrain's political system. The National Action Charter, presented to the Bahraini public in February of 2001, proposed significant reforms. It outlined plans to transform Bahrain from an emirate into a constitutional monarchy with an elected parliament. In a referendum held in February 2001, an overwhelming 94.8% of voters endorsed the charter, demonstrating public desire for political reform and participation. Following this referendum, Sheikh Hamad implemented several important changes. He pardoned political prisoners and detainees, including those who had been imprisoned or exiled on security charges. He abolished the state security law and the state security court, which had permitted detention without trial. Perhaps most symbolically, in February of 2002, Sheikh Hamad declared Bahrain a kingdom and proclaimed himself king rather than emir, emphasizing the nation's sovereignty and the new constitutional framework. The new constitution, implemented in 2002, established a bicameral National Assembly, consisting of an appointed consultative council and an elected Council of Representatives. Elections were held in 2002, marking the return of parliamentary elections after nearly 3 decades. Significantly, women were granted the right to vote and run for office, making Bahrain one of the first Gulf states to extend such rights. While no women won seats in the 2002 elections, several would be elected in subsequent polls. However, the constitutional reforms also contained provisions that limited Parliament's power. The appointed upper house, the Consultative Council, was given equal legislative authority to the elected lower house, meaning the government could effectively block legislation it opposed. The king retained extensive powers, including the authority to appoint the prime minister and cabinet, command the military, dissolve parliament, and appoint all members of the upper house. Critics argued that these provisions limited genuine democratic accountability. The early 2000s saw continued economic development and modernization. Bahrain's banking sector continued to thrive, though it faced increasing competition from Dubai, which was emerging as a major financial center. The government invested in infrastructure, education, and tourism. The Bahrain International Circuit, which hosts the Bahrain Grand Prix Formula One race, opened in 2004, putting Bahrain on the map for international motorsports fans and generating tourism revenues. Bahrain also developed as a telecommunications and technology hub. The government invested in modern communications infrastructure and worked to attract technology companies and startups. Educational institutions expanded, with Bahrain hosting branch campuses of international universities and investing in technical education to prepare Bahraini youth for knowledge economy jobs. The discovery of significant new oil and gas reserves in 2018 provided a boost to Bahrain's economic prospects. The kingdom announced that it had discovered its largest oil find since 1932, with potentially 80 billion barrels of tight oil offshore. While extracting this tight oil would require advanced technology and significant investment, the discovery reassured Bahrainis that petroleum would continue to contribute to the economy for decades to come. Yet challenges persisted. Youth unemployment remained a concern, as the education system produced graduates faster than the economy could absorb them into quality employment. The private sector often preferred to hire expatriate workers, who typically accepted lower wages and had fewer employment protections than Bahraini citizens. This created resentment among young Bahrainis struggling to find opportunities in their own country. The economic relationship with Saudi Arabia grew increasingly important. Bahrain benefited from Saudi economic support, including arrangements to share revenues from offshore oil fields and occasional Saudi financial assistance during economic difficulties. However, this dependence also limited Bahrain's policy independence and meant that Saudi preferences carried significant weight in Bahraini decision-making. Throughout the post-independence period, Bahrain maintained close security relationships with Western powers, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. The United States Fifth Fleet has been headquartered in Bahrain since 1995, providing a major American naval presence in the Gulf. This relationship has been valuable for Bahrain's security, but has also made the kingdom a target for criticism from those opposed to American regional policies. As the second decade of the 21st century approached, Bahrain appeared to be successfully navigating the challenges of modernization while maintaining stability. The economy was diversified beyond oil, the banking sector was thriving, major infrastructure projects were underway, and limited political reforms had been implemented. Yet beneath this surface of development, tensions around political participation, sectarian divisions, and economic opportunity continued to simmer, tensions that would explode dramatically in 2011 during what became known as the Arab Spring. Chapter 6: Contemporary Bahrain and the Path Forward. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through Bahrain's history and geography, we turn to the most recent years, a period marked by dramatic upheaval, ongoing challenges, and the continuing evolution of this small but strategically significant nation. The second decade of the 21st century would test Bahrain in ways that few could have anticipated, revealing both the fragility and the resilience of the modern state built on such ancient foundations. The year 2011 began with hope and anxiety throughout the Arab world. In Tunisia, protests had toppled a long-standing dictator in what became known as the Jasmine Revolution. In Egypt, massive demonstrations in Tahrir Square were challenging President Hosni Mubarak's three-decade rule. Across the Middle East and North Africa, people were taking to the streets demanding political reform, economic opportunity, and dignity. This wave of popular mobilization, quickly dubbed the Arab Spring, would soon reach the shores of Bahrain. On February the 14th, 2011, protesters gathered at the Pearl Roundabout in Manama, a major traffic circle featuring a prominent monument of a pearl held aloft by 6 dhow sails, symbolizing the Gulf Cooperation Council's 6 member states and Bahrain's pearl diving heritage. The initial protests were relatively peaceful, with demonstrators calling for constitutional reforms, greater political participation, an end to discrimination against the Shia majority, and action on unemployment and corruption. The protesters set up an encampment at the roundabout, which quickly became the symbolic heart of Bahrain's protest movement. The government's initial response was restrained, but tensions escalated quickly. In the early morning hours of February the 17th, security forces moved to clear the Pearl Roundabout, using tear gas and rubber bullets. Several protesters were killed in the operation, and many more were injured. The violent crackdown shocked many Bahrainis and internationalized the crisis, as images of the assault spread through social media and international news outlets. The brutality of the response transformed what had been a reform movement into something more radical, with some protesters now calling for the end of the monarchy itself. Protests spread beyond the Pearl Roundabout to other areas of Bahrain, particularly in Shia villages and neighborhoods. Demonstrators blocked roads, including the vital highway connecting Bahrain to Saudi Arabia via the King Fahd Causeway. The economy began to suffer as businesses closed, tourists cancelled visits, and international financial institutions grew concerned about stability. The Bahrain Grand Prix, scheduled for March, was cancelled for the first time in the race's history. In mid-March of 2011, the situation reached a critical turning point. On March the 14th, approximately 1,000 troops from Saudi Arabia and 500 police from the United Arab Emirates crossed the King Fahd Causeway into Bahrain under the framework of the Gulf Cooperation Council's Peninsula Shield Force. This marked the first time the GCC's mutual defense provisions had been invoked for internal security purposes. The presence of Gulf troops, particularly Saudi forces, fundamentally changed the dynamics of the crisis. On March the 15th, King Hamad declared a 3-month state of emergency called the State of National Safety. With Gulf troops providing support, Bahraini security forces launched a comprehensive crackdown on the protest movement. The Pearl Roundabout was cleared by force, with tanks and armoured vehicles moving in to disperse the encampment. In the following days and weeks, the iconic Pearl Monument itself was demolished, physically erasing the symbol that had come to represent the protest movement. The government said the monument had become a divisive symbol and that the roundabout needed to be redesigned for traffic flow, but to protesters and their supporters, the demolition was a deliberate erasure of their movement. The crackdown extended far beyond clearing the streets. Thousands of protesters were arrested, including prominent opposition figures, human rights activists, doctors who had treated injured protesters, and teachers accused of supporting the demonstrations. Many detainees reported being tortured while in custody. Some were tried in military courts, receiving lengthy prison sentences. Opposition political societies were targeted, with some leaders arrested and charged with plotting to overthrow the government. Several protesters were killed during the crackdown, though exact numbers remain disputed. The healthcare sector became particularly controversial. Security forces raided the Salmania Medical Complex, Bahrain's main public hospital, where doctors and nurses had treated injured protesters. Medical professionals were arrested and charged with various offences, including participating in efforts to overthrow the government. International medical organizations condemned these actions, arguing that medical personnel have a duty to treat injured people regardless of political circumstances. Some of the convicted medical workers were later pardoned or had their sentences reduced following international pressure. In response to international criticism of the government's handling of the crisis, King Hamad established the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry in June of 2011. This commission, led by international legal experts and chaired by Egyptian-American international lawyer Cherif Bassiouni, was tasked with investigating the events of February and March and producing an independent report. The establishment of such a commission was unusual in the Gulf region and was seen by some as evidence of the government's willingness to address concerns. The Commission's report, published in November of 2011, was remarkably frank in its findings. It confirmed that security forces had used excessive force against protesters, that systematic torture had occurred in detention facilities, that the demolition of Shia mosques had taken place, and that medical professionals had been unfairly prosecuted. The report made numerous recommendations for reform, accountability, and reconciliation. The government publicly accepted the report and pledged to implement its recommendations, though critics would later argue that implementation was incomplete and superficial. King Hamad announced a national dialogue in July of 2011, bringing together government supporters and some opposition groups to discuss reforms. However, major opposition groups doubted the dialogue's effectiveness, noting that it was packed with government supporters and that fundamental issues like constitutional reform were excluded from the agenda. The dialogue produced some recommendations, but many felt it was more a public relations exercise than genuine reform effort. The 2011 crisis left deep scars on Bahraini society. The sectarian divide between the Sunni minority, which dominated government and security forces, and the Shia majority, which had led the protests, widened dramatically. Trust between the communities eroded, and mutual suspicion became endemic. Economically, the crisis damaged Bahrain's reputation as a stable business environment. Some financial institutions reduced their Bahrain operations or moved regional headquarters to Dubai or other Gulf cities. Tourism suffered, and the sense of relative openness that had characterized Bahrain compared to its more conservative neighbors diminished as security concerns led to restrictions. In the years following 2011, the government maintained tight control over political activity and expression. Opposition groups faced continued restrictions, with some banned outright. Key opposition figures remained in prison or in exile. Bahraini authorities revoked citizenship from hundreds of people, mostly opposition activists, leaving them stateless. International human rights organizations consistently criticized Bahrain's human rights record, documenting ongoing arrests of activists, restrictions on freedom of expression and assembly, and allegations of torture in detention facilities. The Bahrain Grand Prix returned in 2012 under tight security, but the event remained controversial, with protesters attempting to demonstrate during race weekends and international human rights groups calling for the race to be cancelled or moved. Formula One continued to hold races in Bahrain despite the controversy, arguing that sport should not be political, though the presence of protests and heavy security made it impossible to ignore the political context. Parliamentary elections continued to be held, with votes in 2014 and 2018. However, major opposition groups boycotted these elections, arguing that the political system remained fundamentally undemocratic, with the appointed upper house able to block legislation and the king retaining decisive power. Voter turnout was disputed, with the government claiming strong participation while opposition groups alleged much lower actual turnout and accused authorities of inflating figures. Despite political troubles, Bahrain continued working on economic development and diversification. The government pursued its Economic Vision 2030, a strategic plan aimed at making the economy less dependent on oil revenues and creating more opportunities for Bahraini citizens. Focus areas included financial services, tourism, manufacturing, and logistics. The government invested in training programs to prepare Bahraini youth for private sector jobs and implemented policies encouraging businesses to hire Bahraini citizens rather than expatriate workers. The expansion of the Bahrain Petroleum Company refinery proceeded, a $7 billion project to increase processing capacity from 267,000 barrels per day to 400,000 barrels per day. This represented one of the largest infrastructure investments in Bahrain's history and was expected to create jobs and increase revenues from petroleum processing even as the country worked to diversify away from oil dependence. Bahrain strengthened its regional relationships, particularly with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which had supported the government during the 2011 crisis. When Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt imposed a diplomatic and economic blockade on Qatar in 2017, citing concerns about Qatar's alleged support for extremist groups and close ties to Iran, Bahrain severed diplomatic relations and closed its airspace to Qatari aircraft. This crisis reshaped Gulf politics, though it was eventually resolved in January of 2021 when the countries agreed to restore relations. In 2020, Bahrain joined the United Arab Emirates in normalizing relations with Israel under the Abraham Accords, agreements brokered by the United States. Bahrain and Israel established full diplomatic relations, opened embassies, and began cooperation in areas including trade, technology, and security. This move was controversial among Bahrainis, particularly given long-standing Arab solidarity with Palestinians, but the government argued it served Bahrain's strategic and economic interests. The COVID-19 pandemic, which emerged in late 2019 and spread globally in 2020, presented new challenges for Bahrain. The government implemented lockdowns, travel restrictions, and other measures to control the virus's spread. The economy suffered as tourism stopped, businesses closed temporarily, and oil prices collapsed. However, Bahrain's healthcare system generally coped well with the pandemic, and the government implemented an extensive vaccination program, achieving among the world's highest vaccination rates per capita. As Bahrain looks toward the future, it faces significant challenges alongside its opportunities. The sectarian divide that widened after 2011 remains a fundamental social and political issue. Creating genuine national unity and addressing the grievances of the Shia majority while maintaining the Khalifa's position requires a delicate balance that has so far proven elusive. Political reforms that might create more inclusive governance while preserving stability remain a topic of intense debate. Economically, the imperative to diversify away from oil continues, even with the discovery of new reserves. Creating sufficient high-quality employment opportunities for a growing young population is essential for stability and prosperity. Competition from other Gulf states, particularly the UAE for financial services, tourism, and foreign investment requires Bahrain to identify and develop its unique competitive advantages. Environmental challenges pose long-term threats. Water scarcity intensifies as population and consumption grow, while aquifers deplete and become salinized. Climate change brings rising temperatures, more extreme weather events, and rising sea levels that threaten low-lying areas of this island nation. Balancing development with environmental protection and sustainability will be crucial for future generations. Yet Bahrain possesses significant strengths as it navigates these challenges. Its strategic location remains as valuable today as in the time of ancient Dilmun. Its educated population and relatively developed infrastructure provide foundations for economic development. Its long history of trade and cultural exchange has created a society that, despite recent tensions, has experience with diversity and adaptation. The financial sector, though facing competition, remains substantial and sophisticated. As we conclude our journey through Bahrain's history and geography, we can reflect on the remarkable continuity and change that characterizes this small nation. From the ancient Dilmun civilization trading copper and pearls, through centuries of Persian, Greek, Arab, Portuguese, and British rule, to the modern independent kingdom, Bahrain has repeatedly adapted to new circumstances while maintaining its essential character as a crossroads, a meeting place, a hub of commerce and culture in the heart of the Gulf. The Khalifa dynasty, which has ruled since 1783, has witnessed transformations that Ahmed al-Fateh could never have imagined. From pearl diving to petroleum, from traditional monarchy to constitutional kingdom, from British protectorate to independent nation, from regional backwater to international financial centre, the changes have been profound. Yet the family's rule has endured, adapting to each new era while maintaining its position. Today's Bahrain is a nation of contrasts and contradictions. Ancient burial mounds stand near gleaming skyscrapers. Traditional souks operate in the shadow of modern shopping malls. Conservative religious values coexist with cosmopolitan lifestyles. Political restrictions contrast with relative social freedom. Dependence on Gulf neighbours combines with aspirations for independent influence. These tensions and balances define contemporary Bahrain, a work in progress, a nation still writing its story. As the sun sets over the Persian Gulf, casting golden light across the waters that have sustained these islands for millennia, Bahrain continues its journey. The challenges ahead are real and significant. The opportunities are genuine but require vision and effort to realize. The outcome remains uncertain, as it always does, with history unfolding in real time. But one thing is certain: the story of Bahrain, which began thousands of years ago when the first inhabitants recognized the value of these islands with their precious freshwater springs, will continue into a future that builds upon this remarkable past.